Hello and hello. Thank you for joining me. How you guys doing? Look at this. Passport 2. Absolute German YouTube legend. In fact, I frankly think he deserves more subscribers based on the quality of his videos. I actually watch them all the time. So go check him out. Link down below. But this one has a ton of views, so I wanted to react to it. How watching the news in Germany is completely different than in America. Okay. I'm very curious to see where he goes with this. Let's do it.
When you turn on a TV in Germany at 8 p.m., you will notice peculiar events as you flip through the channels. When I first saw this, I felt like I was in a dystopian world where you only had one source of
Burned the bra.
information that everybody followed. But as I watched and listened, I realized the news in Germany is nothing like I had ever experienced in the US before. And it made me question, is this a better way?
It is a particularly kind of interesting question to me because I've been looking at these freedom indexes a lot, and a lot of them, have a metric like press freedom, which of course, well, I shouldn't say of course, but here in America, in the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights, freedom of the press is enshrined in the Constitution. And yet, other countries score higher in this metric. And it's because like the access to the press and all this stuff and the press isn't as corrupt or centrally owned, all these reasons. So this topic I've actually been thinking about a little bit.
Hey guys, and welcome back to our channel. I am Donnie, and along with my wife Aubrey, we are two Americans currently living in Germany with our baby, sharing all of our experiences living and traveling throughout Europe. The US is coming up on a presidential election cycle in 2024, and
yeah, that happened.
Things have already been heating up in the media. As we've talked with family back in the States, and as we've observed this process from a distance while we live in Germany, we've really started to notice more and more differences in how the news in the US and the news in Germany reports on these events. Of course, it's not just limited to politics though. In general, how the news is reported, how people respond to it, and where people put their trust is different between Germany and the US.
Trump has done a marvelous job at totally undermining half of the country's trust in the news at all. At all. So, and of course he did that by exploiting a grain of truth, which is that a lot of the American news is very spinny and opinion-oriented. So, he took that and ran with it. And now nobody trusts the news at all, which is great. So nobody knows what's true.
That's exactly what I'm going to talk about today in my video. Extra. Is the news in America being a little extra? In both the US and Germany, you have various sources of news at different levels and using different mediums to distribute information. In this video, I want to focus on the national mass television medias in either country. So who am I talking about? Well, in the US, the big three national news sources are CNN at third place, MSNBC in second place, and far ahead of the pack as the leader of news in the US is Fox News. In Germany, the largest national news sources are RTL Aktuell.
It is interesting, and if you wonder, why is Fox News number one? Because I always kind of wondered that. Well, I think it's two things. I think it's, well, if you don't know, Fox News is right-leaning, and MSNBC is left-leaning. CNN used to feel kind of center. It's a little bit left, I'd say. But anyway, so that's one reason, left-leaning stuff kind of has multiple channels, and right-leaning basically only has Fox. But also, more so than just that, who's watching the news on TV anymore? Mostly old people, and old people skew more conservative. So the conservative channel gets more views. I think that's why.
Heute Nachrichten von...
Wait, how do these have way more viewers? Are these calculated differently? Because is this the average concurrent viewers, I think? It has to be, right? Yeah. Not total views, but viewers at any given time, 1 million total viewers. How could Germany have 3 or 4 million?
ZDF, and by far the most watched news source is the Tagesschau from ARD. And the
That has 10 million?
Tagesschau is exactly what I was talking about at the beginning of the video that I initially perceived as almost a dystopian single source of information when I first moved to Germany and before I understood what it was. So what is it? And why did I have this perception as an American the first time I saw it? So the Tagesschau would translate roughly to day's show or review of the day. And every evening at 8 p.m. for 15 minutes, 10.13 million people in Germany tune in.
Wow, that's remarkable. That's so cool. So it's just a 15-minute, I did not know this. It's just a 15-minute long, I want to watch this now. It's only 15 minutes? Yeah, like I want to tune in and watch that.
To the Tagesschau. However, what channel do you tune into to watch the Tagesschau, you might ask? Well, it
Channel 0.
almost doesn't matter because you flip through the channels and there it is, and there it is, and there it is, and there it is, and there it is. The Tagesschau is a publicly funded news station from the German public service network ARD. The short
I know that
name for
Arbeitsgemeinschaft der öffentlich-rechtlichen Rundfunkanstalten in der Bundesrepublik Deutschland.
Yeah, you could say that again.
Yeah, that's the German language for you. The main Tagesschau program is aired on the channel Das Erste, but simultaneously aired on ARD affiliated networks like NDR, RBB, SWR, WDR, HR, Dreisat, etc., which are all regional parts of this publicly funded broadcasting network. This publicly funded television and radio system in Germany was established after World War II when the Allies divided up Germany into different broadcasting regions. Those were later merged, and then they further based the broadcasting system roughly off the BBC in the UK, so that it was completely separate from any government influence or funding to ensure a propaganda arm of the government could never again have control over the flow of information to the mass.
So how's the funding different? Or like, oh, is it because the people pay directly like a specific tax for it? Because I know you guys obviously pay like that type of tax.
Like what happened under the Nazi regime. Thus,
which is kind of smart.
We eventually got the Tagesschau, the main source of news information in Germany, and why it airs on so many publicly funded channels at the same time. In fact, this source of information is so important for the German people that German primetime television does not start until after the Tagesschau at the bizarre time of 8:15. Actually, private TV network Sat.1 once tried to break the Tagesschau stronghold and influence on television by starting their primetime at 8 p.m., but it failed miserably.
Why would you even try to do that? I'm going to try to compete with this thing that 10 million Germans are watching. Everyone on their TV is watching it.
And even
I wouldn't bother.
Though they aren't part of the public broadcasting system, they were inevitably forced to push primetime back to 8:15 because they just couldn't compete with the Tagesschau. In Germany, publicly funded TV is the main form of television and is funded by, well, the public through a broadcast contribution that nearly every household in Germany must pay. The exceptions to who has to pay the current €18.36 per month per household contribution is very strict and mostly applies to those with low income on welfare or have serious health issues that hinder them from actually being able to use these services. The great irony, though, of the German versus American television system is that the Americans help set up, build, and structure.
That is really smart how you separate that into its own tax, so it's just kind of like nonpartisan. I mean, I guess it would still have a bias, like, or like a, you know, could still have a bias toward Germany. But that's kind of hard to overcome that, right? And not even like a big bias. Because no matter what they do, they're still getting funded.
German system, yet the American system looks
cool.
Nothing like what Germany has today. Now, let's compare all of this to the American system. First, when I say publicly funded news or public broadcasting in general, Americans immediately generally think of TV pledge drives asking for money on the one single publicly funded TV station in the US, PBS. However, PBS is not purely publicly funded, and it does receive some federal government funding and sometimes state government funding, but data from 2018 shows it was at a cost of less than $3 per person per year in terms of tax dollars going towards it. Instead, our public broadcasting has
honestly, that's more than I would have thought.
Well-known telethons and pledge drives to raise funds from private donations.
But I love PBS. Of course, Trump has like done his best to dismantle it and defund it, of course. But it has some like excellent resources for kids and stuff. It's a really good thing we had. It still exists. It's just like, I think it relies on a lot of donations now.
From citizens or private foundations or companies, and they also get funding from member stations' dues or other sources.
One thing that they have, sorry to interrupt, and this is kind of random, but like, I don't let my kids play like very many games like on the phones. You know, they're very young, and you know, but sometimes I do. Is my point. You know, if we're in a waiting room or whatever, you know, whatever. Sometimes I'll let them play. And PBS has free games. Like they have an app, like a free games, which is pretty cool. You know, because a lot of those kids game apps will try to like sell you stupid microtransactions, and then you've got your kids trying to buy shit on your phone.
Television news
without even knowing what they're doing
generally will come from private companies that are financed through advertisements or subscription services, for example, that are all competing for your attention at all hours of the day and night. Since the news channels all have their own shows, you don't have the same experience of flipping through the channels and seeing the same face reporting the news over and over again at one time in the evening like I experienced in Germany. In a way, one thing that this made me feel was that I have a lot of different options and perspectives that I could watch and piece together what the common thread of truth was from the different ways a story was reported by the various channels. That's why when
it's a lot of work to do, huh?
I saw the Tagesschau simultaneously being aired on different channels, and based on all of my perspectives that all news sources have a bias, I thought it looked like Germans were being fed one singular point of view rather than a plethora so they could get multiple angles on a single story from. Now,
it's funny because like, I mean, on one hand that makes sense, but on the other hand, it's like, you know, ideally the truth does not have an angle. You know, it's just the truth. Just report the truth. Don't put an angle on it. How about that? Novel concept.
I'm not saying that the Tagesschau is 100% without bias. I don't believe that's possible. However, what I wasn't taking into consideration at first was a very
well, there's one thing they're definitely biased toward, and it's keeping that tax going in Germany. Okay, so there's a little bit of a bias, right? So like, what political party, is there a political party that wants to remove that tax? Because then obviously, there you go. That's their bias, if they have one. You know, whatever party, you know, the pirate party wants to remove the broadcasting tax, they're probably going to be a little anti-pirate party.
Important difference in the two forms of media, and that is how the news is reported.
But maybe they can't remove the broadcasting tax no matter what they do.
To show the difference, just watch these two short clips of the most watched news sources in either country.
Argentinien steht nach der Wahl des Rechtspopulisten Milei zum neuen Präsidenten vor einem historischen Regierungswechsel.
This is a Fox News alert. Celebrations across Argentina as the libertarian candidate Javier Milei secures the presidency in yesterday's election.
One of my favorite quotes I've seen to describe the Tagesschau that highlights the main differences between it and American news media is that the news is delivered by news readers, not news personalities. Because of the structure of American news and media, all of the private television channels must compete for your attention, right, which leads to them becoming more and more entertainers rather than informers. Now again, this is also not to say that things are always so dry and purely informative in Germany.
Einfach sagen, und deswegen mache ich jetzt hier diesen Tisch mal kaputt, ja? Damit du mal...
Now, the Tagesschau in Germany isn't technically without competition, and it's also not that private news.
And also, I'm just thinking about, it's an interesting question. I'm just thinking about like how, in what ways would they be biased? And I guess just like a general German worldview or like a general, like whatever, like the popular kind of like, even if you try not to be political, you're going to view things through the lens of like Germany or like as Germans. I don't know. I do like how it's not sensational. I do appreciate that. Because that obviously implies, you know, well, it just is indicative of the fact, like he's saying, that they don't have a profit motive and therefore they don't have to be all bullshitty. So that removes a lot of the bias and the problem.
News stations don't exist in Germany. That can get a little more similar to American news styles, but Germans just don't value that kind of news and information. The Tagesschau has a 34% share of the audience, nearly bettering the combined audience share of all the American networks, PBS, and cable newscasts combined.
Wow.
And a lot of that is due to the way that it is presented.
I'd be curious how popular that format would be here in the States. A 15-minute wrap-up for the day. It's pretty interesting. I think a lot of people would tune into that. Maybe.
Besides how the news is delivered, there is also a difference in what kind of news is reported on between the top news sources in Germany and the US. For example, in the Tagesschau, you don't find any tabloid news, no soft news, but relevant stories about politics, economics, culture, and less sport. But they also are trying to fit the most important stories in a 15-minute time frame, so they generally focus on the big important stuff. Well, they do have time to fit in other less important stuff from time to time.
Das Jugendwort 2023
So this is where they do the youth word of the day. That's why it's such a big deal. Got it.
steht fest.
I'm learning a lot.
Und es ist
Did I say youth word of the day? I meant year.
goofy.
Now, later in the evening, you do have the Tagesthemen, in which ARD is able to take topics from the 15-minute Tagesschau and discuss them in more detail in a longer formatted show. But that's unlike on, say, Fox News or MSNBC, where you have an entire channel dedicated to reporting news 24/7 and will cover maybe slightly less important but more entertaining stories at times as well to get your attention.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Shrinkflation now apparently coming for our Oreos.
But one of the main differences I've noticed in the news is reflected in something that Nathaniel Drew.
It's funny because you can just see the bias right there, because most likely if they ran that news story right now, that was under Biden, I assume. I'm making some assumptions because I don't know if that was a recent clip. His video right there that I'm reacting to is 2 years old. So that would have been Biden. I don't necessarily know where that Fox News clip is from, but they probably wouldn't have said, "Thank you, Mr. President, for the shrinkflation," because it's Fox News and they're biased.
Said in one of his videos about the differences in living in the US versus Europe.
Here in Europe, there's a steady stream of news coming from the US, but when I'm over there, it feels like there isn't much talk about what's going on in the rest of the world unless something really big happens, like a war. Most mainstream media barely covers what's going on internationally, and unless you're a worldly American, and there definitely are some of those out there, you don't have very much of an idea of what's going on out there.
True. I do think the internet helps that. So young Americans are hopefully beginning to, become more informed about the rest of the world. Hopefully. I can help. Because, the internet's not siloed to America. It's a worldwide web. It is, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of times in the US, you can get the sense that the US is the
But as far as on TV, yeah, it's basically just US.
center of the universe, and you can forget that stuff is going on in other parts of the world because American media just doesn't cover as much international issues as they do American issues. To be fair, there are factors that play here, like the sheer size of the US always giving material to news agencies, plus the importance that the US plays on the world stage is simply different from countries that are much smaller and have much less influence on the world politics. Because of the way that
Yeah, unfortunately, the rest of the world kind of has to pay attention to what's going on in the US sometimes because it impacts them.
these news sources are funded and the nature of polarizing politics in the US, you also don't typically have the issue of news stations being associated with political parties in Germany like you have in the US. In the US, the idea is generally if you are a Republican, you turn on Fox News, and if you're a Democrat, you tune into basically any other news source. Or
God, that is true, and it just is it's so disappointing to me. As somebody who, I actually prefer to watch news bias sources from people I disagree with, genuinely. And also, you know what, not only does that give you a different perspective, because I already know my own perspective. I'm more so interested to hear someone advocating for the other side, and then I kind of, debate it in my head. But also it gives you the realization that like most people on the other side are not like evil. Like I like some of these, even some of the news personalities, of the people I don't agree with. You learn, maybe they're stupid on some things, but they're trying. A lot of them are trying. They think. They're being honest about what they think is best for America, even if I think they're dead wrong. And that so you gain a little bit of respect for your fellow humans, which is important. It's important for people to respect each other, even if they disagree. There's an entire lack of that here in America right now.
Specifically, we could say CNN or MSNBC, for example. In Germany, you have a very interesting different situation. Those on the left and the right do not differ in regard to the media source they turn to most for news. Both those on the ideological right and left cite ARD as their main news source. Yes,
that's a major win, right? That's very impressive.
Yes, there are other minor news outlets that
that just speaks volumes for how relatively unbiased that news is.
Lean one way or another politically that Germans could seek out if they wanted, but for overall information, the choice is generally clear for those across the German political spectrum. This polarization in the US politically and seemingly lack of polarization in Germany also produces an interesting result in trust in the media in both countries. So we've talked a lot about who Germans and Americans watch if they watch mass media, but are these the most trusted news sources in Germany and the US? For Germany, it should seem obvious. Even though both the left and right-leaning individuals in Germany both watch ARD the most for their news, 8 in 10 Germans say they trust ARD with their news, whereas in the US, 61% of Democrats say they distrust the largest national.
I'm surprised it's that low. I would have thought among Democrats, they distrust Fox News. I would have thought it would have been 85%.
News source Fox News, while 65% of Republicans say they do trust Fox News. Now,
I would have thought that would be higher. Huh. Okay.
Now,
that's actually kind of a good thing.
I mentioned that in this video, I wanted to focus on the top national news sources in each country to compare, but I do want to point out that overall, more Americans have no trust at all in mass media than those that do have trust in mass media regardless of political leanings. But 83% of Americans do trust local news stations, which
it's true. Local news, there's something about the nature of it to where you can just tell it's less biased. Probably because the people there just kind of evidently don't have an agenda. It's kind of just self-evident when you're watching it. They don't have some sort of agenda to be influencing your opinions on things. They are literally just reporting the news, like the local news. So yeah, I trust my local media, which is a good thing. At least we got that.
Are often much less political and dramatic than national news. Of course, I can't cover all of the differences between the mass media outlets in the US and Germany in one single video, and this video also still fails to mention local news, social media, independent news, or even newspapers and radio. Therefore, be sure to let me know other differences you know of in the comments below. To see who made it this far into the video, the random question of the week is: how do you feel about the app rentable scooters in cities? Do we like to use them or no? Thanks so much.
Do you guys have those rentable scooters? I'm surprised more people don't die on them. That's my opinion. But I do have fun on the scooters. The Jugendswart is incredibly important. Well, let's look it up then. The youth word of the day or the year. Why do I keep saying day? Yeah, I've noticed that it's held in high regard. That was a really great, informative video. I learned a lot there. Go check out Passport 2. Excellent channel, as you can see. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.